One part of this conversation that I think comes up quite often is, what about the women? There is something to be said about how it is that people want to have a conversation surrounding, okay, everyone is really interested in defending the innocence of that life, but that life is now attached to another life, and that life is extremely important to consider in all of this as well. And so people will come up with a variety of different arguments. One of those arguments that I was recently introduced to is called the violinist argument, and Trent,
Yes.
I'm sure you're familiar with that. I would
Yeah.
love for you if you could briefly maybe just explain it to our audience. What is the violinist argument, and what issues do we find with that argument, and how do we rebuttal it?
This is a thought experiment proposed by Judith Jarvis Thomson, the late philosopher from MIT. And Thompson said maybe abortion can be justified not as killing, but as refusing to give aid. And she gives us a very implausible story about waking up connected to an unconscious violinist, and he needs your kidneys for 9 months to live. And if you unplug from him, he'll die. And so you have to stay plugged into him. And if you don't have to stay plugged into him, a pregnant woman does not have to stay plugged into her unborn child, so to speak, and can have an abortion. So this is an argument by analogy, and we need to show the analogy is off. It's disanalogous. They're not the same thing. And people, you will say, well, that's a silly idea. That would never happen. Well, just replace it with organ donation. To say, look, even if one of you needed my bone marrow to live, I couldn't be legally forced to give you bone marrow. It would be great if I did, but I couldn't be legally forced to. Why is a pregnant woman legally forced to carry her unborn child? So, what are the differences? Well, first, if you guys are sick, I'm not responsible for that. So, I don't owe you anything. But a man and woman who engage in the marital act, even outside of marriage, have an obligation to this child. They have a responsibility to the new human being that they've created to sustain that child. That's not in the violinist case or organ donation. And number two, if I don't give you guys bone marrow, I don't kill you. I'm just choosing to not save your life. Something else is killing you. In the violinist example, not plugging into the machine, you're not killing the violinist. You're just choosing to not save him. Okay. And then but with abortion, it's not failing to save the life of the child. The child was perfectly healthy. Abortion killed that child.
That's
It's
right.
not that it failed to save them. uh, and then finally, my bone marrow wasn't made for you guys, and my kidneys weren't made for the violinist. So I don't have an obligation to share that with you or him. But the uterus, the womb, is made for the unborn child. If that child is a human being like you or I, then they have the right to basic care, including food, shelter, and clothing. And for unborn children, that's just the right to live in the one place where they can have a life. So we see the argument breaks down because it's just disanalogous. It's not the way pregnancy is, and all of us began life at that point, and it would be selfish to say we had that right, but no one else does.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
One key term you used here, Trent, was responsibility, right? I mean, again, so many of us fight for our rights, but who is willing to actually take on his responsibility, right? This is huge, and the other thing that I find so intriguing is the idea of love and versus selfishness, which you mentioned towards the
Right.
end, right? So you have here society telling you that you are unloving because you don't care for this woman who has quote unquote this parasite within her.
Right.
That this person herself in that case, is she unloving when she ends the life of her child? Or is she loving, I should say, if she ends the life of her child?
We have to distinguish between an act being loving or unloving and the personal intentions and dispositions of a person. So clearly, abortion is an unloving act. To love is to will the good of another, and
Hmm.
to take someone's life of an innocent person is to certainly not will the good. It's to deprive them of the most basic good that they have, their own life. Killing the innocent is never loving. So the person herself, people are complicated, but we would say that she could be acting out of all kinds of intentions. She could be a very selfish person choosing abortion. She could be someone who feels coerced by other people, someone who feels coerced by her social situation and feels like she doesn't know what to do, someone who's not operating with the most rational thought right now, like someone who thinks about jumping off a bridge because they have a lot of problems in their life. Uh, so the person, I would say what they're doing is unloving, and that person's heart, it will depend on the person how disposed they are to love others. Some people choose abortion, they're very selfish. Other people choose it and they try to do good, but their ability to choose the good has been warped by circumstance or other sinful behaviors that they've engaged in. And so people are going to be all different, but we can say the act they're engaging in is unloving, and they as human beings ought to be more loving than that.
Yeah.
Mm.
So again, I think it has to be very clear for the audience that when we speak about abortion here, we're talking about generally speaking, right? We're not talking about specific cases, let's
Right.
say, right? When the person is capable of loving, right, that's the choice that the person ought to choose, right?
Right.
Father Anthony, any input?
I think the whole responsibility conversation is a piece that we're not hearing enough about, especially when we're talking to so many of our younger people. The
Yeah.
onus has to be put back on the two individuals who are allowing themselves to engage not only in something that is very sinful, but if you're engaging in sinful, unprotected sex, thinking to yourself that abortion is an easy option because you can't be bothered to be able to go about making your decision differently or abstaining or living a life that is chaste or unadulterated from sexual immorality, you are allowing for yourself to think that that human life is nothing more than a nuisance. So to use the words that you were using earlier, Father Gabriel, you're seeing that a human being is nothing more than a parasite. And so you just want to flick it off of your body. The irresponsibility and the lack of sacredness that is shown in our society today towards life um, is really unfathomable. It's really something that has to be called out for what it is because there's such an evil mindset. I don't know what it was like for you, Father, and Trent growing up, but 25 years ago, when I was a teenager growing up here in Canada, the major argument that people were trying to make was that, it's not a human being. Don't make me feel guilty for killing
Mm.
what's not human. Today,
Right.
people are
Who
saying,
cares?
yeah, yeah, I don't care. Sure, it's a human being, but I have the right to kill as long as
Yeah.
it's attached to me. The level of evil that is so easily grasped
Right.
by people and adopted,
Degradation. Yeah.
it's so sad. It's
Mhm.
uh, it's it's really shameful.